School, which meant that for 25 years we wrote checks to Columbia University. In 1979, I accepted a job as an attorney at the Rouse Company and moved to
Columbia.
I live in the village of Harper's Choice, which means I pay
Columbia.
in 2012, I accepted a job as president and CEO of the Columbia Foundation. Back in the day. And because of that, I was so sick of Columbia that I changed the name to the Community Foundation of Howard County. Beat that. I was actually going to talk to you today, not as much about me, although knowing that background is helpful because I was born in the baby boomer generation and lived on what we call the black side of Rock Creek Park during the days of segregation. And so my experiences and approach to the world and toward life really do include the experiences I had growing up, which are so totally different from the experiences of my daughter or my grandson. And we do not teach enough history so that people really understand what happened. James Rouse was born in 1914. First of all, everyone knows who James Rouse was. Yeah. James Rouse founded the town of Columbia. He grew up, he was the youngest of 5 children, and lived a fairly affluent life until around 1931. His mother died. 6 months later, his father died. About 4 months later, they foreclosed on the house. His brother had to drop out of college to try and help support the family. James Rouse wasn't able to go to college because there were 5 kids and there was no money left. But this was a turning point in his life. Having been raised in Eastern Maryland, which was, as far as I could tell, like the Deep South.
Yeah.
I mean, everything in his life was segregated, but he thought it was normal because it was normal for him. And he had as many racist views as anyone else who grew up in that era and in that time. He went to the pen relays. He was a runner. Went to the pen relays, and after running around the track, he and some kids from his high school walked into the locker room, and some black athletes were in the locker room. They turned around and walked out. He did not want to go into a locker room with black kids. But in 1931, his brother said, you know, Jim, you really do need to try and get back in school. So his sister had moved to Hawaii. His sister moved to Hawaii and said, well, you know, if you move out here and you don't have parents, we will be your guardians as our dependent, you're eligible for in-state tuition. And only because of that, totally changed his life. The first time he went to a class in Hawaii, he also turned around and walked out because everyone was a mixture of races in Hawaii. And he thought, you know, these are just weird mixed race people and I don't want to sit in classes with them. And someone told him, well, then you better leave Hawaii because that's what the environment is like. And by the end of his first year, he had come to appreciate the value and the worth of people who were not just like him. But for that trajectory to Hawaii, we wouldn't have Columbia.
Yeah.
I mean, people have said to me, well, you don't want to say he was racist. I think that makes the story even more powerful. We can all change. He came back, there's a lot of stuff in between, but when he decided to develop Columbia, Maryland, he knew he couldn't just go out to this basically southern community and say, I'm going to build a city here that's interracial. He couldn't have done that. So he did it in secret. He secretly bought 10% of the land in Howard County, and only 6 people knew. The community thought, well, maybe the UN is going to build a cemetery, or maybe it's the Germans who are buying land. There were all kinds of ideas. Who the heck is buying this much land in the middle of Howard County, Maryland? And one day, James Rouse walks into a county council meeting and said, I own 10% of this county, but I need zoning approval to create the city I want to create, which will be open housing. Now picture, this is in the 1960s. The Klan is still running around in the 1960s. The schools here were still segregated. The last school to integrate was, I think, 1965, which was Atholton. Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. Howard County was not a progressive county. In fact, what year? It's like 1966. George Wallace.
Oh yeah, 66. That was 66.
George Wallace was the Democratic Party's nominee in Howard County, Maryland. I mean, incredible. So here comes James Rouse, having bought up a good part of the county, to say not only is it going to be integrated, but the county didn't want a city, they wanted to stay rural. And he went to he and his team, not all by himself, went to 500 meetings to persuade residents in the county that his plan for development was better than what they would get otherwise. He said, this will not stay farmland. So just accept that. You're between Washington and Baltimore, 2 of the largest metropolitan areas at that time on the East Coast, and they're starting to merge. You can either grow like Route 1, or you can plan a new community. And that's what he did. he brought in a team of experts. And these weren't people who just knew how to build a house. He said, that's not what I'm looking for. He brought in PhDs in education. He brought healthcare people. He brought environmental people, a team of 14 preeminent experts from all over the country. And they set about planning what the new perfect community should look like. And the number one thing he said they first needed to focus on, education. He said, I want a community that is vibrant and well-educated, but people will not move here to build their companies if the educational system stays the way it is. Howard County's school system ranked, I think it was like number 15 in the state of Maryland for counties. I mean, they weren't spending money on schools. Education, I won't say it wasn't important, but it clearly wasn't a priority. And he said, nope, we're going to make schools the number one priority. Now, this presentation can go on for a long time. I've sort of wet your tongues with this. I'll be giving much more extensive presentations in a number of places. The Department of Social Services has asked me to give presentations at the community centers. I'm going to give one at, hopefully in Wild Lake Village Center. I've been asked by Howard Hughes to give one for Howard Hughes. Oh, I mean, people don't know.
They don't.
There is no one at Howard Hughes today
Yes.
who worked
That's
at the development of Columbia.
Right.
And they need to know.
Agreed.
But we also need
to
to not only to know, but to share it.
Yeah.
Shame on us
Yeah, I
for
agree.
not inviting our Korean and Indian and Chinese neighbors to dinner to share with them the story of this remarkable community. We have more PhDs than almost any place other than Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
And intentional diversity created all this. How are we going to keep it here? How are we going to make it look a little different? James Rouse didn't create this environment and say, now let's put it in a glass case and never to change. He expected it to evolve. Now 20% of our community is now Asian. That he would not have thought of, but I think he would have been very, very proud. But how many of us go to dinner with someone who's from India or someone who is Muslim or Hindu? That's what we need to start doing. That's what James Rouse did in his own way. And so I hope you'll be able to come to the full presentation. And then we'll be able to reach out into the community. I'm with the Community Foundation of Howard County, and one of our missions, which James Rouse founded, by the way, we are the first community foundation in the state of Maryland. And what we do is work with individuals and companies to address concerns in the communities or support local nonprofits, because James Rouse felt government can't and won't do everything. a lot needs to be done by the residents. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind if we ask you a couple of questions?
Oh, ask me a couple questions.
good.
I'll hold this.
No, Beverly, I totally agree with you because I'm a native Marylander, for one. And I remember James Rouse prior to this because my state police background, he was born in Eastern Maryland in Talbot County.
Yeah.
And Maryland has always been considered America in miniature. And when I say that, you can get the Eastern Shore remind you of the Deep South. You get Western Maryland, it reminds you of Montana, Idaho, whatever. I'm sick because in the state, when I was in there, I had to drive and patrol all 23 counties. And when you understand the culture of each county, and I drilled down even deeper, Talbot County, not Talbot, they call it Talbot County. When you go over to Carver County, not Calvert County. So that's learning the culture, and Rouse came from there. And being that he got into the market of shopping centers and all,
Yeah.
I go back to Montdaumen.
Which was one of the first shopping centers in the country. It wasn't covered. The second shopping center he did was
Yes.
one of the first covered shopping centers.
And so also when we moved back here, he and Patty, his wife, was still alive. And he would come and visit each interfaith center. It was part of his, I guess you can say, part of what he wanted to do. My daughter went to school and my son went to school with his grandchildren, Molly and also
Ed Norton.
Ed Norton. So they've got that connection in there. And I tell people who coming from the other parts of the country and also here, you have to read his story.
Oh,
You must read his story on how he created this particular community.
when I give the full presentation, it takes your breath
Yes.
away that someone who was just a normal human being with all the frailties that we all have could develop one of the wealthiest, healthiest, most highly educated, most diverse and inclusive communities in the United States of America. It's an amazing story.
His vision blows your mind. It really does. Yeah.
Presidential Medal of Freedom he received. Cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
You name it, he won it.
And the key point, he could walk in here and you would not even know who he was.
Never.
Yeah.
I started at the Rouse Company in '79,
Okay.
which was the year, 2 years before he retired. And I was nobody. I mean, I was a young attorney, certainly would never have been in a meeting with the CEO, and by then he's getting all of these accolades. And they needed someone to translate letters he was receiving from a foreign country, and nobody spoke that language except for me. So I translated his Russian letters into English and sent them back up the flagpole. And one day he walked all over the building trying to find the little lady. Now mind you, I was 5'9" in my bare feet. Wasn't so little. But trying to find the little lady who translated his letters. And every time he saw me after that, he would come over to me, put his arm around me, introduce me to people. What CEO in today's world would do that?
Yeah.
He was such, and it wasn't just me as an attorney. I hated going to the grocery store if he was there. I said, God, I can't get out of the line. I've got a baby at home, a husband. And he would talk to the man behind the counter. He would talk to the person sweeping the floor. He was an unbelievable human being
Yeah.
who started out with all the frailties that many of us have.
So
Yeah.
Hawaii,
Mhm.
I'm gonna go back to that because that blew me away. I had not heard anything
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I know what Hawaii has meant to me.
Mhm.
What do you think it was about Hawaii that totally changed
Well,
him?
for the first time, now remember, you have to put yourself back in
His
total
world.
segregation.
His world, yeah.
He had never sat in a classroom with anyone who wasn't white.
Right.
Never.
Right.
And had been told by the educational system in the 1908, that era, the Daughters of the Confederacy made a big push in the southern states to be sure that the school curriculum reflected the positive things about the Civil War. All of these Confederate monuments that they're just taking down now, they were put up then in 1908 and say to the 1950s, really. They were still putting up monuments. But the big surge in monuments was around the time James Rouse was born. So he grew up in that environment where whites were superior. It was their birthright, and he believed it. So now he's over in Hawaii being forced to sit in a room with people from Japan and Africa and, the Middle East. It was just a polyglot of races and ethnicities. And by the end of that first year, since he had to suck it up, he learned to truly appreciate the different cultures. And he said there was one anecdote where he ran around the track. He was still a runner and got winded and stopped and sort of bent down, and so he felt someone put his hand on his shoulder. And he looked up, it was a black hand, and it was like a light bulb went off. And this young man, whoever he was, I think he was a black person from maybe Morocco or someplace in North Africa. And he said it was like this light bulb went off in his head, and that was one of the moments that changed his heart and changed his life. And it was Hawaii. Had he not gone to Hawaii, we wouldn't have Columbia. You never know.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
incredible.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.